Top Med Talk.
This is Top Med Talk, the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. The EBPOM World Congress is taking place this year between the 7th and the 9th of July at the British Library in London. Check out ebpom.org now.
Well, hello and welcome to Top Med Talk. I'm Kate Leslie and I'm coming to you with my co-host Andy Cumpstey from Dunleary Harbour in Dublin in Ireland. And Andy and I are here for the annual general meeting of the British Journal of Anaesthesia. But we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk to some of the fantastic editors and editorial board members while we're here. And we've only just left Dingle in Ireland, Andy. How did you find that meeting?
That's always a really special meeting, isn't it, Kate? We've been the last few years a very special part of Ireland and the wild west coast. The weather didn't disappoint again this year. It was wet and wild the entire week, but that didn't dampen anyone's spirits. It was a really good, fun, warm, lively meeting with great scientific content and probably some great social activities as well.
It's the only time that I've ever been given a talk and a picnic chair flew past the window in the gale.
It's an incredible spot, and although we joke about that picnic chair that did fly past the window, we were nice and warm inside and looking out at this amazing storm, and it was quite a spectacle, but everyone had a really good time. Actually quite a small, friendly group, and that storm blew through pretty quickly. And after that, it was stunning. Stunning place to be, amazing, beautiful scenery, great place to kind of get away for a few days.
Yeah, well, the trustees of the British Journal of Anaesthesia have generously lent us a room and some people to interview, so why don't we crack on with that?
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves, and I should start with a disclaimer as well. So the British Journal of Anaesthesia is running a programme for editorial fellows, which I've been part of this year. And there's a number of us doing that on the programme this year, and I'm going to ask three of the other editorial fellows to introduce themselves now and join us for conversation.
Great. Thanks, Andy. My name is Allison Janda. I'm a cardiac anesthesiologist at University of Michigan in the United States. Happy to be a British Journal of Anaesthesia fellow this year. For my clinical work, I'm mostly cardiac anesthesia, but also do thoracic and vascular. And then for my research work, I do some retrospective outcomes work and also work with some perioperative clinical trials, which are really fun and exciting.
So I'm Brett Doleman. I'm from the University of Nottingham, and I'm currently clinically working as a resident doctor at the Royal Derby Hospital, and my interests lie in regional anaesthesia, major general and acute pain. And for my research, I do a lot of acute pain research and a lot of statistics, which is both in network meta-analysis and clinical trials.
I'm Christina Boncyk. I'm from Vanderbilt University. Excited to be a British Journal of Anaesthesia fellow this year with these other, classmates. I work in critical care anesthesia, so spend time in the ICU and the operating rooms, do some teaching, and then my research is focused on critical care outcomes following ICU survival, working on medication management in the ICU.
Excellent. So, as you can see straight from the outset, a huge range of research backgrounds between us all. But I think for people that might be listening to this overseas, the first thing we should probably start with is explain what the editorial fellow role is and why we each wanted to, apply for it because it was competitive, and then sort of what the roles involved.
Yeah, my motivation for undergoing the editorial fellowship was I was already involved with peer review, and I've done quite a lot of extensive work with peer review, but I really didn't have any insight into the role of an editor in terms of wider roles such as handling papers and making decisions on manuscripts and those essential roles. And this British Journal of Anaesthesia editorial fellowship gave the opportunity to be able to engage in those tasks and have one-to-one mentorship with a experienced editor and undertake some of those editorial tasks that I hadn't had the privilege of undertaking before. And my experience so far has been very positive. I've had the opportunity to get involved in those activities from the start, so I would thoroughly recommend it to anybody who's interested.
Allison here. Thanks, Brett. I have a very similar rationale for how I applied to Brett. I really wanted a more insight and behind the scenes view into what goes into handling a paper, how the editorial process works, and get more reviews under my belt so I could be a better reviewer as well for on the peer reviews that I was doing. And then during the editorial fellowship, we've definitely reviewed a lot more papers with feedback from my excellent mentor, Kate. So it's wonderful to see her in person as well. And that feedback has been really helpful as I'm sculpting reviews, both in our areas of interest and outside of them, which has really broadened horizons that I wouldn't have otherwise had exposure to.
I agree with my co-fellows. It's been a great experience. I will say if you apply and you get rejected, to apply again, because that was what happened when I first applied to the fellowship. But it's been a great experience. And I think understanding what happens, having submitted articles to journals, getting specific feedback, it was very much trying to see behind the curtain of what goes on into the review process to make me a better reviewer, a better submitter of journals. It's helped me understand a little bit more of the research, especially now when research and publications can be interpreted so differently. It's nice to be able to see what goes into that process and how the reviews help refine the end product.
And I'd agree with all of that. I think it's really interesting seeing the different perspectives from the reviewer side to the author side of the same paper. It's just, you submit a paper to the system and it goes off into the ether, and then you get some comments back a few weeks or months later. But that kind of black box behind the electronic system, whichever system your journal is using, is really interesting to see what's going on there. I don't know, rather than me doing all the talking, maybe some of you can talk about some of the things you've seen in that black box, or some of the processes you've seen happening, or things that you have picked up maybe from the process so far.
Getting an insight into seeing how decisions are made and how they are very much based on the reviewer comments. And you always didn't really have much of an idea when you submitted a paper what was going on during the process and whether reviewers agreed or whether you felt hard done by when your paper's rejected. But I think the fascinating thing I've found is that in general, the decisions made on a manuscript from reviewers and editors together they're pretty much in agreement. And I think that's a good sort of indictment of the system itself, that the peer review system works well. And I think that's been quite good to see, really. And it makes me have a lot of faith in the sort of peer review process and the decisions made by the editors on which articles should be accepted.
Absolutely. The rigor, I think, that goes into it. Submitting an article, it can seem a bit automated, that it goes into a system, everything's very structured, you get a decision back. It can seem like you're almost getting an error back from a computer system after you input all of your hard work, and it's less personal. But seeing it on the backside and understanding how much thought and effort goes into reviewing articles and providing constructive feedback, I think has been a very wonderful surprise to know that all still is happening and it's not as humanized.
We actually, as journal editors, want to make the author experience as human as possible, because we know that authors put their heart and soul into their research. So we endlessly are talking about the sort of author experience. So the review process is key. So Alison, what have you learned about how to make the author experience better so that even if manuscripts are rejected, the authors still are eager to resubmit a paper or an article to our journal?
Great question, Kate. I think the way we present reviews in an uplifting, positively constructive way is really important, where even if I read an article and I think that it's probably not fit for BJA or have other issues with it, describing and giving a very thoughtful review still can be very helpful in the process, to respect their work and respect the time that they put into submitting an article and doing their research. And so I think that increasing the author experience and making it both feasible to resubmit a paper just from a logistic standpoint of inputting everything in a nice interface, but also when that human response comes in, it's very thoughtful and critiques things in a way, but it's constructive critiques, not negative. Even if you're suggesting big changes, you can do it in a way that still inspires positivity, inspires them to change it for the better.
And Brett, you have reviewed dozens of systematic reviews for the BJA, for which we are eternally grateful. What sort of specific things can you do to improve the author experience in that sector of our work?
I mean, I would say one aspect that is helpful is even down to the generic letter that's sent to authors and is often sort of personalised for their feedback, is to know that a lot of papers that get submitted to the British Journal of Anaesthesia, the overwhelming majority, that not many get accepted in the end, and it's a very high bar because it's the leading anesthesiology journal in the world. And I think just knowing that initially is quite an important thing for authors to know because of the very few papers that do actually get through. But I do think it does come down to the feedback from the reviewers because, even if you don't get a paper into the British Journal of Anaesthesia, you still get that immense feedback if it's gone out for peer review where you can improve the review and you can then submit it somewhere else with an improved version. And I think that part of the process is very valuable for authors who submit systematic reviews and allows them to refine the process. And actually, you learn something along the way. If you've got expert reviewers looking at your systematic review, even if it gets rejected from the British Journal of Anaesthesia, you've got important... when I review a lot of papers, I will suggest additional analyses that haven't been considered by the authors, and that is another example of where authors can learn new analysis techniques that can allow them to improve their reviews, and they can use that going forward so that when they resubmit reviews in the future, they will be improved and have a high chance of getting into the journal.
I think it's that positive mindset is really important. You do hear our reviewers say, I'm providing free mentorship to authors who realise their paper will never be published in my journal, and why am I doing that? And you both have couched it positively, which is it's part of the scientific endeavour, but it's also part of the business of running a successful journal is to attract authors. Andy, have you done anything in particular to try and improve the author experience?
Following on from what Brett said, that sort of positive, constructive feedback is really, really important. So we all know we've all been authors before we started becoming peer reviewers, and so we've all been on the receipt of these reviews as well as writing them. And there's nothing more soul destroying, to be honest, to put a whole huge amount of work in to something and someone else sends back some often anonymized comments that seem to be critical about what you've done. And I think the way some of those comments are phrased, as Brett, Tina, Allison have all sort of highlighted, is really, really important. And clearly the standards have to be met, that you can't just have something being weighed through, or it's got to be at the right standard. But going back and telling someone how to bring things up to that standard is actually quite a skill. And I think one of the things I've, enjoyed still learning through this editorial fellow process with feedback from the editor mentors and actually each other when we talk about the reviews we've done is ways of trying to sort of steer that constructive commenting back.
So Tina, we sometimes have trouble finding reviewers for papers, and so we really want to know what makes you enthusiastic about being a reviewer and how we can find other people just like our editorial fellows to work with our journal. And also, every journal in the world has got the same issue. So what do you like about reviewing papers?
I find reviewing papers is a kind of cheeky way to be able to see what's on the front end of things within the specialty. Obviously, it can be a bit more intriguing to do it within my research interest. And so being able to see what other people are thinking of, how they've approached problems that I'm thinking of, but from a different perspective or for the different strategy has been wonderful. But also reviewing papers with things that I'm not familiar with and trying to use that opportunity as a way to ask the authors to clarify things so that those articles can be approachable from a broader readership has been helpful. That you don't have to know everything or be an expert in every piece of anesthesia or research to review without being able to contribute valuable feedback.
I think another important point with the peer review process is you're never the only peer reviewer. So if you take the time to come up with your thoughts or views or comments about a particular article, whether it's in your area or not in your area, that'll go back to the editor, who then assimilates 2, 3, 4, maybe even more reviews depending on what that piece is. But then when that's sent back to the authors, all the peer reviewers get a copy of all the peer reviews, all anonymised. But I found that process really, really useful as well. You see what other people have thought of the same article that you've been reading from the same viewpoint, starting afresh with no prior experience of that study, no prior experience of what's been done before. They just received it at the same time I did. And it's amazing, not just the similarities between the reviews, but sometimes the little details that different reviewers pick up. And it shows that all the reviewers are actually very different people with different backgrounds and experiences as well. And you can learn a lot from that process as well, I think.
What do you think, Alison?
Yeah, I really enjoy the review process for a few reasons. I think some of which my colleagues already touched base on, but I really like how you have an opportunity to improve science in a small way, by providing some constructive feedback, but also being a little bit of like not per se a gatekeeper, but kind of enactor of rigor of trying to make sure that only the best science gets passed to actually be published, because that's what's going to be consumed broadly. And so I think that there's really a lot of great opportunities for us to be providing feedback to authors in kind, approachable, respectful ways that help people improve their science and also make it more approachable to different readers, maybe not of the same expert level for that specific method, and make it more readable to the full group. And I think that kind of ability to help sculpt science even after the study is complete is really cool and can help with a lot of different things of how that study lands for different readers.
And we've got to bear in mind as well, we all, we're all engaged in science, and we all know that research is a team sport. Peer review's the same as well, and it's fine to approach a review with a bit of humility of, the analysis method they've used. I'm not an expert in that, but I can comment on the clinical importance and these aspects. And from the same token, as I do a lot of statistics and review of the analysis methods, that will be my specialist area. And some of the other reviewers, as part of the whole team, as well as the editor, may have more insight into the clinical importance and how much of that research has been done before and covered by other papers. And I think that's fine. It's all part of that teamwork that comes together to ultimately reach the right decision.
So I think in summary, from what you've said, it's fun. You learn a lot. You get a feeling of making a contribution. But I think you've also alluded to the professional responsibility of clinician scientists and others, all scientists really, to contribute to this important process. And then there's the things that you get as actually tangible rewards, like being able to list this activity on your CV and your applications for promotion, Andy.
Yes, I guess I should start thinking about that soon, Kate. It's interesting because I think the CV points are often, it's something that's banded around as, oh, you should do this because it's good on your CV. There's a lot of things out there which are good on people's CVs, and it can be quite hard to choose, actually, I should go for this or I should go for that. But I think for all the reasons you've said, this is a particularly good one to aspire to do. I guess it might be perceived as being good on people's CVs, but it's good for a reason. And I think we all feel that we've personally improved our own scientific abilities and knowledge through doing the process. And maybe that's the reason it's seen as a good CV points exercise.
We get over 50 applications every year for this fellowship, and the older editors look at all your CVs and think, what have I been doing with my life? So many wonderful activities. But it's one of those things that can just make you stand out from all the other great applicants, I think.
So I guess the follow on from that then, Kate, is, you talked about, as an editor, you struggled to find peer reviewers. To get onto this process, we all had to do a number of peer reviews, not as part of the application process, but I think it's fair to say to get onto the scheme, you have to have done some peer reviewing before, and then the scheme helps develop and extend that knowledge further. But how do people take that first step into getting into peer reviewing then?
My journey started when Professor Adrian Galb came to one of our conferences, and I've foolishly expressed an interest in doing some peer reviews. He was an editor for the European Journal of Anaesthesiology, and literally 5 seconds later there was an invitation in my inbox. So if you have access to another reviewer for a journal or one of the editors of a journal, you need to express your interest and then accept the invitation right away, complete it by the deadline, make it sure it's got an adequate volume of comments and an adequate quality of comments and all those respectful things that our fellows talked about. If you don't have anybody directly that you think you can approach, then you can email the journal and say, don't send like pages and pages, but here's a few things about me I'm really keen to review.
And again, coming back to the rest of us on the fellowship program, I think I've got a number of colleagues who I either supervise or mentor or work with who are perhaps, I'm not going to say afraid, maybe intimidated about being asked to peer review something, and they feel it's a big responsibility, and they're a bit like what we touched on before, Brett, about there might be areas they feel they can't comment on. What would you say to those people who are sitting there not accepting the invitation because they're worried about doing a bad job or not doing it well enough?
Well, I think it comes back to what I was saying before, in that it's very easy to dismiss yourself and think I don't have enough experience to do a peer review, but there's always something you can offer to some part of the manuscript. And that's not to say you're not going to start out peer reviewing and be able to understand every aspect of how they did the analysis, how they collected the data. It might not be in your particular area, but you will be able to contribute something to it, and you will be able to be a valuable part of that process. And we've already discussed that you're not alone. You're not going to be making the decision on the manuscript. You are going to assess that and critically appraise the paper, give some comments and give your opinion on it. But it's going to be a team effort, and everyone will come together and your contribution will be valid.
I would say I've been there. You get a review and you say, oh, geez, I don't know if I'm qualified to comment on this. I think to what Kate had mentioned earlier, lean on any mentorship you can get. If somebody had invited you, you could ask a question back to that editor. You don't share the article, to other people, obviously, to give feedback on your review, unless they were the one that invited you to do that. So that's something that I was fortunate enough that one of my mentors was an editor and, said, okay, this is your first review. Let's talk about this and go through all of it back, years ago. And that was really, really helpful to inspire some confidence and competence in it. But if you don't have that kind of presented to you, you can ask for those opportunities by applying for the BJA Editorial Fellowship, for instance. If it's not your first review, but you have some under your belt, and getting more mentorship and more feedback as we're all doing this year. But if you don't have that, you can ask for that kind of feedback. But I would really encourage people not to let the imposter syndrome be a barrier. It's something that we've all, had when those land in our inbox, and you can just ask for some mentorship or feedback on how things are going from that standpoint.
So I think in summary, our answer is, if you get the invitation, say yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to all four of our editorial fellows here for joining the podcast today. We are very grateful to the British Journal of Anaesthesia trustees for giving us access to our wonderful guests and the venue for this podcast. And we'd also like to thank GE and BD Advanced Patient Monitoring for their sponsorship of TopMed Talk. You can find TopMed Talk on our app and on our website, and we're on all of the socials. So with all of that, thanks and cheers.
TopMed Talk.
TopMed Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. Join clinicians from around the world at EBPOM World Congress 2026 between the 7th and the 9th of July at the British Library in London. 3 days of evidence-based perioperative medicine, global insights and expert debate, featuring speakers including Michael Marmot and Ken Rockwood. Go now to ebpom.org. That's ebpom.org.